Our next speaker and last speaker is Maurie Mulheron. He is the President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation.
Yes, can I just acknowledge we are meeting on Aboriginal land. My name is Maurie Mulheron. I'm President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. I've been a teacher for 34 years, the last 10 as a principal, and I've taken up the position of President of the Teachers Federation, an organisation of 70,000 teachers and principals across New South Wales. I took up that position for one reason, because I knew this agenda was coming. And after 34 years of committing myself to public education, and I saw what they were planning to do with our system, a system that I know and love, that my kids went through, that I've given my career to support, to see what they are planning to do just filled me with absolute disgust. And to that extent, I felt that I had a duty in the last few years of my career to do everything I possibly could to pass on to the next generation of teachers and the next generation of parents who will be sending their kids to public schools, a system that is still going to be intact. It's going to be a tough job. They've got tractors moving the sand. But if we get enough people like yourselves with spoons, we'll be able to shift the sand back. And we may have to. Local schools, local decisions is nothing but a marketing phrase to market a massive assault on the funding of our schools. It's been a plan that's been many, many years in the making. It preceded this government. It's been driven by economic rationalists in Treasury, and it's been delivered by this government. The whole notion of devolution, principals autonomy, school-based autonomy, it'll come up, it's like any sort of feral creature, it'll come up with a new name as soon as it's to survive. As people start to criticise it, it gets a new name, but it's the same agenda. Devolution is economic theory that's about 40 years old. It's economic theory. Not one university education faculty came up with the notion of devolution or autonomy. Defy anyone to find it. I can't. It's an economic theory on how you manage and reduce public expenditure. And it's the same people who have the theory that you privatise as much as you possibly can, whether it be transport or water or electricity or communication. They can't privatise completely schools and health. If you've got to make education compulsory, there's got to be at least a public school for kids to go to, and there's got to be somewhere for an ambulance to drop off people who've been in an accident. So there's going to have some public provision of hospitals and schools. But instead of privatising it, what they have in devolution as a theory has come up with a model where they will reduce the funding, and the model is this. If we reduce the funding as a government, we'll be blamed and thrown out of office. But if you can devolve the budget to a local manager, whether it be a health board or a school principal, and make them manage the budget and deliver the cuts to the local school community, the minister can step back and say, we gave them all the responsibility. It was their local decision. They best met the needs of their school. It wasn't the government who cut. It was the local principal who did it, the local health board. That's effectively what it is. And it's why both Labor governments love it and why Liberal governments love it. Because it allows government to retreat, abrogate their responsibility to look after our kids in their schools, and make the principals down at the local level have to deliver the cuts. It's not about flexibility. It's nothing to do with meeting local needs. I know that was 10 years as a principal, what this agenda is really about. And it is about dollars. At the end of the day, it's about dollars. The New South Wales Treasurer announced local schools, local decisions, not the Minister for Education, but last September. It was the Treasurer who announced it, and he announced it under the heading, delivering on economic and fiscal reform. Not delivering on student outcomes, delivering on economic and fiscal reform. The Commission of Audit released again today. I've just been reading on the car on the way out. Sprinkled throughout the Commission of Audit about public expenditure is that local schools, local decision is a structure that this O'Farrell government is going to use in order to control funding in public schools. And how they're going to do it. At the heart of it, at the heart of local schools, local decision, is to reduce the number of people employed in the system. And it's already started. The number of permanent positions in the system. And that's what they want to achieve. They're already achieving funding cuts of about $10 billion in savings in just in the 2.5% salary cap for all public sectors, but it's not enough because they're going to pull out of the public sector $10 billion in 4 years. $10 billion in 4 years. They're going to reduce the number of public servants by 15,000. 5,000 was last September, June the 12th, and now it's another 10,000. And we know now that there'll be no limit to the number of positions that will go. We've already seen our own department start to reduce it. They have to reduce, in the New South Wales public education, the Department of Education has to reduce its expenditure each and every year by 2.7%, a 1.5% efficiency saving and a 1.2% labour expense cap. Now, when you talk to the senior people in the department, they don't read the fact sheets to you because they know no one will believe them, and they don't believe them. They don't believe their own fact sheets. What they do believe is they've been given an impossible job to deliver the 2.7%. And they don't know how they're going to do it. They simply do not know how they're going to do it, because this will be a structural change that will be permanent and there'll be no going back. We've seen that in Victoria. In Victoria, they introduced this nearly 20 years ago under Jeff Kennett. Victoria went from one of the lowest per capita expenditures of state money into public schools of anywhere in Australia. It has now been the lowest for years. It spends less on their kids than any other state under devolution and so-called principals autonomy. It has now got 18% of its teaching workforce, that's 8,000 positions, are temporary, casual positions. 50% of young teachers in their first 5 years of teaching have never held a permanent teaching position in Victoria. That's what awaits New South Wales. And just like the Victorians, once it's in, it's a structural change that no change of government will ever be able to undo. We have already seen the head office cuts under local schools, local decisions. This great reform agenda has now led to this fact, that in English, K-6 English, in the Department of Education, I emphasise the word, has one person, one officer responsible for K-6 English in the whole of New South Wales for about 1,400, 1,500 primary schools. We have one officer for 7 to 12 English for the high schools. For 750,000 students, we have two people responsible for English. We no longer have a Department of Education anymore. We have an outpost of Treasury in the Department of Commerce. It's been gutted as a department. We've lost the Drug Education Unit. The Curriculum Directorate has gone. Leadership and Learning, gone. Equity programs, gone. The Arts Unit now, not one clerical position, 7 clerical positions, gone. There's already been gutted. And we know what they're planning to do in terms of the 1.2 labour expense cap under local schools, local decisions is this. Under the software, the learning management, the LMBR, learning management business reform, which is essentially the software that's going to drive this agenda, that there will be, it's a business model that's based on the loss of 1,600 SAS teachers, that's front office and other support staff, out of schools. 1,600. So not only are the cuts happening in head office, they're going to reach schools. Because that's effectively what it's going to be about. And it won't be the Minister for Education, Adrian Piccoli, defending it, nor will it be senior people in the department defending it. It will be principals who will have to rob Peter to pay Paul. Why is it that you go from a system of staffing entitlement where you base a school, you staff a school based on the number of kids, the curriculum and their learning needs, which is how you currently have. Every one of your schools has a staffing entitlement based on kids and kids' needs and the subjects they do. They're going to go from that model, which is your guarantee. That's why it's actually called an entitlement. You are entitled to it. To a system where you're going to have schools staffed on a budget, on dollars. Now, there's only one reason why you bring in a firm like PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accountants, to devise a staffing system which will be based on dollars and not on kids. There's only one reason, because Treasury will control how much money goes into that bucket. And the gamble for the community of New South Wales is this. Do you honestly think that staffing budget is going to always grow as your school's needs grow? Or do you think at some time a Treasurer or a Premier is going to announce a reduction in that staffing budget? Well, that's your gamble. I'm not prepared to gamble the future of our kids in that sort of scenario. I want some certainty, and I want guarantees for our kids in terms of class sizes, in terms of staffing entitlements. That allocation of staff are critical. And even on the way out this afternoon, I received a phone call from the department to say that the Minister will not agree, will not guarantee, will not agree to giving a staffing entitlement guarantee to schools, even though we've now been after it for weeks. Will not guarantee it. We have to fight this and fight it like blazes. This has got nothing to do with principals, autonomy or authority and all the stuff about red tape and all that sort of guff, as though somehow principals are crushed by this overburden of red tape. I did it for 10 years. I can't be conned on this stuff. It's a great job with great teachers doing fantastic things, but it has to be well resourced. If we want to have flexibility in the system, then you have to have additional funding. You cannot create flexibility in an era of austerity. It never has been done and never will happen. We can have flexibility but with additional money, and we've seen it in the PAS schools and the National Partnership schools. When you get additional funds in, then you can have the flexibility, but you do not get flexibility when you have a government that's hell-bent on reducing it. Do you know what this state government did last year? They underspent in secondary education by minus 1.6%, in primary education. In secondary education, they underspent what they budgeted for. They had the money and they never spent it on your kids, this government last year. They underspent in secondary education by $70 million, minus 1.6%. That money they put back to Treasury. They had it and they gave it back to themselves. That's what they did last year. This is not a government that's going to be improving your kids' lives under local schools, local decision if they do that sort of thing. And there's another very important thing that we need to get out of the budget, and it's this. There's a thing called service measures for primary and secondary education. It actually, in every budget in history, has had the number of kids in schools and the number of permanent employees next to it in the budget papers. For the first time in this state's history, the June the 12th budget had the number of students projected into in our school system, but it was silent, it was blank when it said the number of permanent employees. Why wouldn't you put that baseline data in this year? Because they aim to increase the casualisation of the workforce of teachers, because ultimately that's the cost saving. That's why you would have upon vacancy the notion that a principal can replace a permanent teacher with a temporary. And we see in Western Australia when they did it, in those so-called independent public schools, 47% of the schools now have teachers on short-term engagements from term to term. As a parent, the last thing you need is having teachers who have no security of employment, who won't know from one term or 1 year to the next whether they're going to be in your school or not. We need a permanent workforce that's well paid, of course, to attract the best and the brightest in it. But more importantly, we have a school system where Treasury doesn't determine your kids' futures, but it is a guarantee. Your entitlement, the entitlement to each and every one of your schools has to be preserved. Without it, it'll be an era of uncertainty, where there'll be a grab for money from Treasury, and each and every year it'll be a recurring exercise in principals being empowered to decide what to do without. To rob Peter, to pay Paul. That's effectively what they will be empowered to do. It is, I think, one of the most dangerous agendas I've ever seen in my 34-year career, and I'm determined to make sure they don't get away with it. There's too much at stake, and what's at stake is the future education of the kids in our public school system.